It all begins in the middle of a chaotic and fierce war on a frozen battlefield. At that moment, we see a wounded man on the ground while the system warns that it was a critical strike. The sacred sword of the order struck right through him, showing that there was no hope left. With that, the enemy soldiers celebrate, relieved that they finally defeated him. The fallen man was known by everyone as the feared Dark Lord of the continent. His name was Archman, an extremely powerful necromancer feared by all. He then accepts his fate, knowing that his end is unavoidable. This was a war that lasted 10 long years across the entire continent. Even though he had strengthened his defenses, in the end, they just were not enough. The necromancer admits that this was his perfect and complete defeat. And all of this was because of a single knight named Berkel Rhineland, the leader of the knights. However, the knight says that he did not do all of that alone, because countless people fought and sacrificed themselves so that his sword could reach him. The knight then asks Archman to give up everything for the peace of the continent. But the necromancer cannot stand to hear that anymore and tells his enemy to keep quiet. He says that when the plague was wiping people out, they just watched without doing anything. The necromancer continues, saying that now they preach about peace even though they act worse than wild animals. With his eyes full of anger, he says that all those knights are nothing but hypocrites. He says that all the humans pushed him to that point with their own hands, while an aura surrounds him. Seeing the power that the necromancer unleashed, the other soldiers are completely shocked. The soldiers are surprised to see the necromancer using magic even though he's wounded. One of the knights says he is dangerous and they need to finish him off, but Berkel interrupts him. The leader of the knights reveals that 20 million people fell, and Archman turned them into his army. The necromancer then replies that he already knew that and that it was not absurd at all. He accuses Berkel of just wanting payback for the loss of the people in his hometown. Archman challenges him to say he is wrong, but the knight remains silent. Berkel finally says that there is only one reason for him to be there at that moment. He states with conviction that his fight is solely for the future of the children. With that answer, Archman's body freezes for a moment, leaving him confused. The knight explains that he needs to leave his choices and hopes for the next generation. The necromancer then sees his own corrupted form reflected in his enemy's eyes. But in that same gaze, he notices something completely different from what he expected. They were the pure eyes of a righteous knight fighting for the next generation and his descendants. The villain falls to his knees, completely defeated by those words. With that, the knight prepares to deliver the final strike and end it all. However, he surprises everyone by throwing his sacred sword away, and a soldier shouts his name. The necromancer then draws a sword with glowing purple runes. Archman asks the knight if he has any last words to say. He replies with a smile, saying that a necromancer does not go down so easily. The villain promises that one day he will return, while a dark aura surrounds the hero. However, the darkness fades, and the blonde knight falls to the ground completely defeated. With the runes glowing in his eyes, the necromancer holds his sword firmly. And with a single strike, he finally brings down the hero who defeated him. With losses on both sides, the soldiers celebrate, shouting that Archman is finally gone. Besides the shouts of celebration, he hears the sound of the final strike that sealed his fate. All the knights celebrate the long-awaited victory while darkness takes over his vision. Thus ended the long and fierce continental war that lasted 10 years. And with it came the end of the Dark Lord of the continent, the necromancer Archmund. But in his final moment, his consciousness travels through a strange and unknown place. Suddenly, everything changes, and he finds himself in front of a mansion during a rainy and gloomy night. Inside, two maids are shocked to see that the young master's lips moved. The necromancer, now a baby, is confused, not understanding what in the world is happening. One of the maids approaches the crib and asks if young Master Klein slept well. Another maid shows him the portrait of the Duchess and says she is his new mother. She then encourages him to say "mummy," but his body feels strangely stiff. The woman keeps insisting, and the baby tries to speak, but the words do not come out right. The maids get excited, thinking he is already learning to speak so early. However, the baby opens his eyes and begins to summon the dark guardians and soldiers. The little necromancer orders everyone to obey his command, leaving the maids scared. At that instant, a lightning bolt cuts through the sky, as if the world answered his dark call. And with his call, a huge storm forms over the mansion, with lightning tearing through the dark sky. Then 15 years pass, and now we see the same mansion on a sunny and peaceful day. Some maids watch someone from afar, completely amazed by what they are seeing. They are impressed by the face and hair of the young man standing there. The boy was so handsome that the women considered him a true masterpiece. This young man with white hair and a striking gaze was the necromancer Archmund in his new life. The maids sighed over him, saying that young Master Klein looked perfect and stunning. However, the young man seemed completely indifferent to all the compliments he received. Suddenly, someone throws water at him from behind and says he finally found him. An older man shouts for the evil spirit to leave while continuing to throw water. This is Garrison Jerkin, a priest who found it strange that the boy had the same gaze as Archmund. He notices that 3 people were already being influenced, and the purification was done in time. The completely soaked young man complains, saying it takes nerve to do that with a straight face. Garrison replies that Archmund's soul is in his body, and that is why they need to purify the spirit. Klein tries to defend himself, but the priest interrupts him and throws more water, saying he saw Archmund's face. At that moment, the boy wonders if the priest is actually completely out of his mind. He walks away grumbling and calling Garrison a maniac several times. The priest then orders his men to grab him and drag him away from there. While being dragged, he shouts, saying his name is Clean and not Archmund. Submerged in water, he thinks he did not expect this, as he was sure he met his end that day. He remembers suffering a critical blow, but when he opened his eyes, he was in the body of a baby. Because of that, at the age of 3, he was treated like a dark entity and locked in a monastery. It was in that place that he met the priest of the Holy Order who would torment him. The young man recalls the silhouette of that man appearing at the door for the first time. The priest called him Young Master Clean, and that was just the beginning of his hardships. His routine included extreme trials like Garrison's 24-hour prayer. There was also the freezing garlic bath that the priest prepared to purify him. And the worst was the fire show where he was tied to a burning cross. Under the name of a purification ritual, he had to endure all sorts of harsh punishments. Then, 5 years later, we see Clean sitting on the floor with a party hat, looking discouraged. His exclusive maid, Erin, prays for him to honor his lineage of heroes. The young master, however, gets extremely annoyed by the girl's prayers. In frustration, he pulls the hat off his head and throws it away forcefully. Erin gets sad and mentions that she made that hat with her own hands. He instantly regrets losing his temper and apologizes to the maid. But when he goes to pick up the object, Erin reveals that Priest Garrison was the one who made it. Hearing that, the young man's body freezes, completely paralyzed by shock. He looks at the hat with an expression of complete disgust and horror on his face. At that moment, Garrison appears, calmly calling for young Master Clean. The priest says he is thrilled that he wore the hat he knitted with so much care. The young man tears the hat apart with a smile and says he will never wear it again. Garrison shouts that Archman's spirit appeared, but the young man does not care about that. Right then, Commander Dunkel arrives and asks if the day's purification is over. He mentions that the rumor about the young master being Archman has been around for over 10 years, and that the order declared there were no abnormalities, while Clean covers the priest's mouth. Garrison immediately agrees with the commander and tosses the boy to the ground without thinking. Clean notices that the priest pretends not to hear him but obeys when a commander speaks. The man thinks the boy knows how to play politics and says he is already leaving. But before walking away, he stops and looks back with a serious expression, and adds that there is always a tiny chance of a what-if happening. With his message delivered, Priest Garrison finally turns around and starts to leave. Before walking out, he gives a heads up about the ritual on Friday, and a furious Clean tells him to get lost. The young master stands there angry while the other two just watch him. He then throws himself onto the sofa, completely frustrated and annoyed with the situation. Sitting there, he questions how that man can torment people and still be part of the clergy. His maid Erin offers him a towel and asks if he is not Archman anymore. The young man denies it instantly, saying no way and that he does not even want to hear that name again. But in his thoughts, he knows that if he admits it, the priest will torment him even more. Ever since he was reborn, his life has been watched closely because of that childhood rumor. He complains that he came back home but is stuck with the priest, and Erin says he has his reasons. The maid asks what an executioner is and if it would be someone of high rank in the order. The commander then prepares to answer the curious girl's question. He explains that this is a title given only to the strongest in the entire order, and that besides the Duke of the family, very few can face him because he is incredibly strong. Erin gets excited about the family's strength, and Dunkel asks if there are any other questions. At that, Clean grabs him and asks who is the strongest duke in his entire family. The commander says that although the 7th duke is amazing, the strongest would be the 1st. Then the young master interrupts him, disagreeing with the opinion about his father, the 7th. With a serious look, the white-haired boy states that the 1st is the strongest. The commander is left speechless by the boy's direct and unexpected answer. He understands, and Erin comments that the young master really likes the 1st duke the most. The maid notes that he keeps looking at the portrait, but it does not seem to be out of admiration. Dunkel thinks no one would imagine it, since it has been 200 years since the founding. The young man looks at the portrait on the wall and repeats that it has been 200 years. He still cannot believe it, but he needs to accept that he, Archman the Necromancer, was reborn. We then see the portraits of the family's dukes, from the 7th to the 2nd. And finally the portrait of the 1st duke, the man who defeated him, Berkel Rhineland. He then realizes that he was reborn as a descendant of the man who took him down. He remembers his final moment, whispering the name of his greatest enemy, Berkel, and recalls the knight's words about the reason he went there to face him. The hero said he was there fighting solely for the future of all children. Suddenly, the young man wakes up startled in his bed after having that nightmare. Sitting up, he takes a deep breath, trying to calm down after waking up from the bad dream. The boy mutters that it was a terrible dream while recalling his past identity. He lost control in anger and almost destroyed the continent, but was stopped by the knight Berkel. Upon opening his eyes, 200 years had passed, and he was reborn as that man's descendant. With all his memories intact, he still cannot get used to his new hair. At that moment, Garrison's silhouette appears at the door, saying he heard him talking in his sleep. The priest asks with a smile if he was dreaming about his days as the feared necromancer. He needs to pretend it is not him and says he was just tired, but Erin hugs him from behind. The maid then shouts excitedly that she heard everything he said while he was sleeping. She imitates him talking about wiping out the continent, making the boy panic. Suddenly, the head butler Berkman arrives and announces that the fencing exhibition will begin shortly. Garrison then decides with a creepy aura that the purification sessions will be doubled. The young master covers the maid's mouth, completely horrified by the idea. Outside, the boy shouts in despair, calling the crazy priest out for his decision. The butler then asks about the fencing exhibition while they walk down the hallway. He confirms it and says the Duke ordered the young master to participate in the event as well. The young man is surprised and asks if his father really wants him at the event. The butler scolds the maid for a rude request, but the young master defends her. He then gives the girl a cookie and tells the butler to look at how happy she is. But changing the subject, he asks the reason for the summons, since his father never invited him before. The butler then explains that some relatives from a branch family came to visit them. With that information, the boy understands the situation, thinking about this branch family. At that moment, he realizes that the annoying relatives have already arrived at the venue. One of them then mocks him, telling him not to call him clean but Master Archmond. These two fools are his cousins on his father's side, and they taunt him about the monastery. That group eating frantically is from the northern branch, and they are distant relatives. Further ahead, he also notices his cousins from the western side of the family. A blonde girl stood out among them looking very elegant. One of the relatives yells at him, asking if the boy is deaf, but Clean ignores him. The relative goes on to say that a loser like him does not belong in the Rhineland house. They get furious when he talks back, but the white-haired boy does not care. He says he does not even bother to remember their names and notes that the family is in decline. The way they look him up and down, even though he is the direct heir, says it all. Suddenly, the fencing exhibition begins with two men facing off. One of them gets angry at his opponent and calls him Delane while attacking him forcefully. The purple-haired one ends up getting hit in the head by his adversary during the fight. The purple-haired fighter yells at his opponent to stop hesitating and fight seriously. Delane says the fight is over, but Dalton tells him to shut up and keeps attacking. The blonde boy smiles and says that if there is any hope for the family, it is for a reason. That is Delane Rhineland, Clayne's half-brother and a true genius of the family. Thanks to the boy's talent, the house maintains its reputation as a clan of master swordsmen. The purple-haired adversary shouts that this time will be different and charges again. At that, Clayne's eyes glow purple as he watches the fight with his reincarnated vision. The fighter then advances quickly with his wooden sword towards Delane. But the young genius dodges the strike with impressive ease and without effort. With a yellow aura around him, he moves swiftly, leaving his opponent surprised. The Necromancer's eyes glow intensely, and he realizes he can see everything. With his special vision, he can perfectly analyze Delane's footwork. He also sees the exact timing when the blonde boy pushes off the ground. Frustrated, the purple-haired opponent insults him while preparing to attack once more. Clayne can also see the mana flow and the secret art of the Rhineland house. Delane then kicks his adversary's hand, making the wooden sword fly far away. With his opponent disarmed, the blonde young man declares that the match is finally over. He then turns around and says he warned him that he would be in trouble in that fight. The audience is impressed as they recognize the boy's meteor sword technique. Clayne rubs his eyes and realizes that it was a warning to the branch families. Suddenly, a voice calls out for Clayne in the middle of the castle's luxurious hall. It was his half-brother Delane who asks how long he had been there watching. The blonde boy says he would have tried harder if he knew his brother was watching him. Clayne finds his half-brother perfect and wonders what the relatives are doing there. He suspects they came to ask for money, but his father appears, praising Delane. That is Heinkel Rhineland, the 7th Duke and father of the two young men. Delane runs up to his father while the Necromancer observes the head of the family he was born into. The Duke proudly says that his son must have worked very hard to get where he is. To the father, Delane is probably his last remaining shred of pride. The commander comments on the young man's impressive talent for his age. The boy replies that he still has a long way to go, but his father calls him by name. He then repeats the first Duke's words about the duty of a knight of the house. Heinkel tells Delane to engrave that in his heart, and the young man thanks his father. Next, the Duke turns and calls for the attention of his other son, young Clean. The white-haired boy tenses up upon seeing his father slowly approaching. With a gentle movement, the Duke's hand reaches toward the boy's head. He touches him and says he cannot feel any mana coming from his body. Clean then just apologizes, thinking that now he is nothing but dead weight to everyone. The commander tries to defend him, saying he spent his training years in a monastery. People start whispering that the second son has no mana and is different from his brother. The relatives comment that the direct heirs are useless and that they need to step up. The protagonist walks away, thinking he can handle the insults, but he remembers Burkle. He recalls the knight's words about his fight being for the future of the children. With that memory, the young man clenches his fist with a lot of anger and frustration in his eyes. He then thinks that the Rhineland house is finished and regrets risking his life. As the family withdraws, one of the relatives says goodbye to Clayne in a mocking tone. Dalton provokes him, asking how the young lord does not even know how to use a sword. He continues the insult, calling the white-haired boy a disgrace to the family. The protagonist points out that he is also from the Branch family and taunts him about girls. Dalton is shocked and Clayne asks if he thought money would stop the rumors. Annoyed, the relative asks where he heard that and charges at the young master. With a simple move, the hare takes him down to the ground with incredible ease. Fallen on the floor, Dalton insults him, but Klain says he has just taken out the anger of his defeat. The relative then offends him, saying he does not even know who his real mother is. With a dark look, the protagonist turns around and asks what he just said. Seeing his terrifying expression, the relative is completely terrified and frozen. The problem was not his mother but the superiority complex of the branch relatives. His eyes glow purple, and he wonders how they could have reached this point. He thinks about how the house of the hero who took him down became something so despicable. At that moment, Commander Dunkel appears and tells Lord Dalton that enough is enough. The commander then warns that he will no longer tolerate any disrespect toward the hare. Angry, the relative mutters in frustration but cannot do anything against the guard. He then tells Klain to be grateful for having a bodyguard and calls him a coward. As he walks away, he still yells, asking what the commander is looking at. Dunkel places his hand on the hilt of his sword, ready for any trouble that arises. The protagonist stays silent for a moment, seeming to have an idea in mind. He then turns and calls the name of the commander who is there to protect him. Klain asks if he has a spare sword, and the scene shifts to a forest. Now at night, the commander hands a sword to the young master, who takes it. Dunkel asks why he needs a sword so late, but the boy does not answer. Holding two swords, he asks if Delane used the meteor sword like that. The boy says he needs to check something and dismisses the guard, who looks worried. The commander thinks it is too late because the young master's body has no mana. He believes that without mana, it is impossible to become a knight and use the technique. Even copying the blade's movement, he thinks the boy will not be able to pull it off. But Klain focuses as the image of what he saw in the fight is still very clear. In his mind, he perfectly remembers his brother's footwork and thrust. He also remembers the arc of the blade and how Delane's mana flowed. His eyes glow purple as he absorbs every single detail of the technique. Feeling a strange energy, the commander turns around completely shocked. The commander is bewildered by the strange aura that entirely surrounds him. He cannot believe what he is seeing and thinks it is impossible. Then the young master strikes a rock with a powerful blast of purple energy. His eyes shine intensely as he executes the technique with precision. Enveloped by a dark aura, he looks like a totally different person. The guard is left speechless upon seeing the destruction caused by the boy's attack. Stuttering, the commander can barely call out the young master's name. With a smile, he wonders if he really can use that ability. Maid Erin is shocked, wondering what on earth is happening to the young master. Beside her, Garrison also seems impressed by the boy's endurance underwater. We then see that they are performing another purification ritual with young Klain. The priest notes he can now last over a minute underwater, and Erin is surprised. He suggests doing the next one in an aquarium, and the hare finally surfaces to breathe. Klain complains that the ritual was longer, and Garrison laughs, saying he felt a sinister energy. While Erin offers him a towel, Commander Dunkel calls his name. The guard holds a letter and says that Dalton sent an invitation for him. The boy asks who that is, and Dunkel explains it is the relative who fought Delane. Klain remembers the fool and finds it weird that he wants to apologize out of nowhere. He takes the letter with a suspicious look to read what the relative wants. The invitation mentions a hunting competition, which leaves him intrigued. The former necromancer realizes this is just an excuse to drag him outside. Dunkel asks if he will go, and the young master says there is no reason to refuse. With a determined look, he mentions that besides, he has another plan in mind. The boy reveals he has an ace up his sleeve while the camera focuses on a sword. In his mind, he goes over the swordsmanship he saw his half-brother use days ago. By doing that, he realized something very important about his new ability. He can perfectly copy any technique just by seeing it used a single time. Back in the present, the commander just watches him, unable to say a word. The commander agrees to prepare the carriage, and the boy keeps thinking about the hunting competition. At that point, Garrison offers to tag along, and Klain gets annoyed, asking what he is plotting. With a serious look, the hare says he had already warned him about that before. The priest then replies that, for some strange reason, on that specific day, he was feeling a very sinister energy as the carriage finally departs from the mansion. The vehicle's wheel shakes a lot, showing that the road is quite bumpy and uneven. Inside the carriage, Maid Erin feels really sick due to the constant movement. Garrison says he told her not to come and then offers his pillow to the girl. The young master explains that the forest terrain is tough for first-timers. The priest then suggests she try to sleep a little to feel better during the trip. He is moved by the kindness, but Klain tells him to give the pillow to the maid. Looking out the window, the white-haired boy stays deep in thought for the rest of the journey. He observes the lush green landscape and thinks that place has changed a lot over time. His mind takes him 200 years into the past, when there was only snow and fallen ones there. The boy is surprised that that frozen wasteland is now such a green place. He then remembers his enemy and confirms that all of this was indeed Burkle's doing. Suddenly the door opens and Commander Dunkel calls out for young Master Klain. He steps down and asks if that is Dalton's house while observing the massive mansion. The place was even more extravagant than the main mansion of the powerful Rhineland family. They finally arrive at their destination at the famous and luxurious Cornwall family estate. He thinks the competition is just for kids and they must have money to burn. At that moment, a voice calls his name and the white-haired boy turns around. It was Dalton, approaching with hunting dogs and asking what he is staring at so much. The relative brags about the house and says he used the main family's money to build it. One of the dogs growls at the hare, baring its teeth and drooling from hunger. Klein notices the animals are starving and asks when the real hunt is going to start. The host calls him impatient and says he already knew he would be like that. With his hand outstretched, he tells the young master to pay close attention to what will happen. Dalton then releases all the dogs and announces that the competition is starting now. He explains that he scattered pieces of meat all over the mountain to attract them. The relative says a hungry dog's sense of smell is 100,000 times stronger than a human's. With his bow ready, he aims while the dogs run after the bait. One of the dogs approaches a piece of meat without noticing the incoming danger. Suddenly, the host shoots arrows at the animals, who start running and whining in pain. Dalton laughs maniacally and celebrates, saying that was a successful hunt. Aaron approaches calling for the young master, and the relative turns to her. He recognizes her as Klein's maid and places his hand on the girl's head. With a malicious smile, the host calls out to her and says he is going to give her a new job. The relative then grabs Aaron's arm tightly, leaving the girl frightened. But suddenly someone grabs his wrist and tells him to take his hand off her immediately. With his eyes glowing purple, the hare threatens to break the relative's wrist right in front of him. Dalton then pulls away with a grunt of anger and surprise at the boy's attitude. Furious, he charges at the white-haired young man, insulting him for being so arrogant. But Klein dodges the strike with impressive ease, without even breaking a sweat. With a manic smile, the relative challenges the hare to follow him as he gets on a horse. The former necromancer mounts another horse and tells Dunkel to stay with Aaron and not follow him. Before leaving, the boy hands a scroll to the commander and says he will go along. The guard recognizes the item as a magic signal scroll that works without mana. Klein explains that if the priest suddenly disappears, it could mean major trouble. He then instructs the commander to tear the paper in case Garrison vanishes out of nowhere. With the message delivered, the young master gallops away while Dunkel shouts his name. In the distance, Priest Garrison simply watches the scene in silence, looking thoughtful. The scene shifts to a dark and cloudy sky, indicating that night has finally fallen. The hare rides through the dark forest, thinking his cousin cannot be far away. Suddenly, he stops and Dalton greets him, saying he finally managed to catch up. The relative is sitting on the ground surrounded by the taken-down dogs and asks why he took so long. The young master dismounts and demands to know what in the world his cousin is trying to do. With a confused look, the white-haired boy tries to make sense of the bizarre scene in front of him. We then see the bodies of the hunting dogs scattered across the forest grass. Dalton then says that this is just the grand finale of the day's competition. Dalton, with his sword in hand, reveals that his final target is Klein himself. The relative confirms that he is going to finish him off and take his head to Delane as a trophy. With disdain, the hare says the Rhiannon family is a joke without power or justification. Dalton then reveals a group of hidden men and says he will not even have a chance to fight. The men step out of the shadows ready to strike, and one of them laughs, saying the dukedom is theirs. Other archers also appear ready to fire at any given moment. The white-haired boy does not seem the least bit surprised by that whole situation. With an evil smile, the relative says that tomorrow everyone will be talking about the fallen family of the north. He goes on to say they will mock how the young master met his end surrounded by dogs. At that moment, the former necromancer remembers Burkel's words about the future of the children. A small laugh escapes the young master's lips, leaving his cousin confused. Suddenly, he bursts into hysterical laughter, covering his face with his hand. Dalton is shocked and asks if the situation finally made him lose his mind completely. The boy stops laughing and says that, in fact, his cousin is just a fearless brat. A dark aura surrounds him as he calls Dalton an arrogant punk who crossed the line. Seeing the hare's transformation, his cousin's eyes fill with absolute terror. With glowing red eyes, he says the family was built on his downfall, and he is desecrating it. A powerful blue energy then begins to swirl around the young master. Dalton shouts in fear that this is magic, but he does not even have mana. Engulfed in flames, the hare reveals that this is not magic but dark energy. Dalton's men are terrified by the blue energy and wonder what that is. The relative is then shocked as he realizes what the hare meant by dark energy. With a smile, the young master summons the ancient dark spirits buried in time. He floats and orders everyone to rise and step into the light in his name. The energy transforms, and with a command, he orders the creatures to overwhelm everything. More and more bone warriors form from the darkness, ready to obey their master. Dalton yells that it is impossible while a terrible suspicion crosses his mind. He then screams the name Archman upon seeing the army of phantom soldiers surrounding his men. The former necromancer points and orders his creatures to take them all down without mercy. In his mind, he thought he had already forgotten that feeling after so much time. It had been 200 long, lonely years since his last battle. To him, they were endless days of waiting amidst a sea of darkness and bones. But he could still feel the echoes in the dark crying out for his return. They were the voices of the fallen, calling him and eagerly waiting for his command. That feeling in resonance was something he knew better than anyone. And all that nostalgia filled him completely while the darkness wrapped around him. Back in the present, Dalton keeps screaming that this cannot be true. He shouts the name Archman once again in sheer desperation over the situation. With a victorious smile, the boy confirms that this was what they called him in the past. With his identity finally revealed, the night becomes increasingly dark and dangerous. At this, Dalton's men are shocked and wonder if Archman was not just a rumor. They look at the white-haired boy and ask what those skeletal creatures are. One of the skeletons with glowing red eyes lets out a scary and intimidating sound. The relative and his men stand in silence for a moment, trying to process what they just saw. Suddenly, they start laughing and mocking the creatures, calling them buckets of bones. The necromancer hears that and wonders if they really just called his soldiers trash. The cousin confirms it and brags about having already destroyed hundreds of skeletons on his missions. One of his men agrees and suggests taking a bone home as a souvenir later. Dalton then decides that first they are going to deal with those blocking their path. He orders the rest of his men to clear the way, and the archers get ready to shoot. The men prepare to load their ranged weapons against the army of the fallen. One of the mercenaries aims his crossbow precisely, ready to receive the attack command. The relative then finally gives the order for all his men to fire at the same time. With that, a rain of arrows flies through the sky toward the young master and his army. The arrows get closer and closer, seeming like they are about to hit the boy head-on, but the reflection in his eyes shows that the hare does not seem worried about the attack at all. In a matter of seconds, the arrows come dangerously close to the bone creatures. Dalton smiles smugly and says poor Clean must have turned into a pincushion. However, his smile fades when he realizes something completely unexpected has happened. The arrows were completely blocked by the shields of the skeletons protecting their master. With the arrows blocked, the boy watches his bone soldiers with a smile on his face. He thinks 200 years is a long time and that no one recognizes his skeletons anymore. Dalton's men are shocked to see the shields because they were not there before. The boy says they would only think that way if these were ordinary skeletons, and one of the men gets angry. With a smile, he finishes his thought, saying his skeletons are completely different. The cousin is left speechless by the young master's unexpected confidence. The former necromancer orders the first unit to break defensive formation while thinking of Burkle. He thinks he is going to crush the scoundrels who insulted the future his enemy protected. With a clenched fist, he promises to crush them with his own hands and then orders the charge. Quickly, the skeletons charge at an impressive speed toward the enemies. Dalton yells in shock, asking since when skeletons can run like that. The creatures leap into the air, letting out terrifying screams as they prepare to strike. The relative tells his men not to panic since they are just ordinary skeletons. But one of his men takes a direct hit from one of the skeletons with no chance to react. In just a few seconds, the undead start overwhelming the men, who cry out in pain. With chaos everywhere, Dalton is horrified and curses, unable to believe what he is seeing. He then yells for his men to hold the line, but Claim gives his troops another order. Suddenly, skeletons with crossbows appear in the trees, and the men look up in shock. More undead soldiers appear with their weapons aimed, ready to fire. Dalton's men panic seeing the weapons, and one of them yells for everyone to run. With a simple command, the young master gives the order for his soldiers to fire. Then a new rain of arrows flies at high speed toward the fleeing men. The mercenaries take a direct hit without any chance to escape the attack. We see the silhouettes of the men crying out in pain as they are pierced by the arrows. In the midst of the chaos, one of the skeletons attacks Dalton, while another man falls lifeless to the ground. Desperate, he thinks this makes no sense because these are not the skeletons he knows. Dalton yells for his men to drop the crossbows and switch to close combat. But no one listens and he screams in desperation, asking if they are hearing him. Suddenly, one of the skeletons grabs him from behind, catching him completely off guard. Angrily, he shakes the creature off and insults it while getting ready to strike with his sword. With a single precise strike, he finally manages to strike the head of the bone creature. He laughs and celebrates, saying he knew aiming for the head would be enough to win. But the headless skeleton attacks him with a powerful kick, throwing him far away. The cousin is confused because he was sure he had taken off the skeleton's head. With a smile, Clean reminds him that he already warned him his skeletons were different. We then see the skeleton's body getting back up even without its head attached. To everyone's shock, the creature simply picks its own head up off the ground. The former necromancer explains that this was the reason he swept across the continent in the past. Dalton is shocked to see the creature putting its head back on with its own hands. The creature roars and he explains that spirits with dark energy do not fall easily. At that moment, one of the henchmen panics, seeing that those creatures will not stop advancing, and asks what they are. Observing everything, the white-haired boy says 11 soldiers is his current limit because of his child body. With a smile on his face, the former necromancer gets ready to finish the job and asks if they want to keep fighting. Then the mercenaries tremble with fear, realizing they do not stand a chance against the boy's dark army. While the combat unfolds in the forest, a strange noise emerges from the trees, indicating something is approaching the area. Far away, we hear a laugh echoing near a luxurious fountain in the quiet silence of the night at the mansion. There, Priest Garrison tells the little maid some stories from when the young master lived isolated in the monastery. The girl is highly amused, picturing the funny situations while the scarred man watches her with a very calm look. The cleric then notes that she seems to like the protagonist quite a bit, and the girl confirms it with a lot of excitement on her face. With her cheeks full, little Erin states that she truly adores her master and starts listing all his good qualities. But while she says how amazing he is, we see young Clain telling the enemy to stop screaming during the massacre. At that moment, the maid says the boy is very kind-hearted, but in the forest, the men are fighting desperately to survive. The girl keeps talking about what a sweet person he is, while one of the skeletons slashes a mercenary with zero mercy. She mentions that the master even shares his cookies with her, but the scene cuts to the intense aftermath of the enemies falling on the ground. Smiling, the little girl claims he is the warmest person in the whole world while quietly finishing her snack. However, the hare's face is covered in the aftermath of battle, and his cold stare shows he feels no remorse for his actions. With that, another enemy soldier is taken down by the dark blades, letting out an unbearable cry of pain in the midst of the chaos. Dalton watches everything in shock, unable to believe his men are being defeated so humiliatingly and quickly. The cousin then mutters a heavy curse while trying to defend himself from a powerful attack coming from one of the bone creatures. He freezes upon noticing that, even after being hit, the monster stays standing and starts slowly regenerating its body. Right then, Dalton curses the bone creatures and says he will at least make sure they stop healing. He realizes the hare is the target and figures that if he can take him down, everything will finally be over. So the cousin charges through the battlefield, ignoring the fallen soldiers to reach his goal. Shouting Klain's name, the aggressor leaps with his blade ready to deliver a final strike to the protagonist. The villain warns that the games end there, because the summons vanish when the master is defeated. But at that instant, the sword comes down with full force toward the white-haired boy who just stands still. With that, the necromancer's eyes shine in an intense purple tone as he watches the enemy's movement. The boy says he can see the attack perfectly, and a powerful energy starts radiating from his body. Gripping his weapon tightly, he decides to use a technique he only saw one single time in the past. At that moment, he projects the image of his brother Delane and starts mimicking all his movements perfectly. The attacker realizes the boy is using the Ramlin family's secret art and is utterly shocked. With incredible speed, the hare executes the meteor sword technique and slices the air with extreme precision. Dalton then feels the impact of the blow and is left confused, not understanding how the young lord got so strong. Looking down with contempt, the protagonist warns that the real punishment is just beginning and that he will not have an easy end. Under the dark sky, the sound of someone gasping for air echoes through the forest as the fight reaches its final destination. Seeing his cousin on the ground, the boy agrees that creations lose their power if the summoner is defeated. He recalls that the old archman met his end precisely because of that weakness in his final confrontation. A blue aura wraps around his hand as he reflects on how ironic and full of surprises destiny is. The young man thinks that the power of his enemy's family was what allowed him to protect his essence. Finally, the former necromancer admits that the blood of his greatest rival has made him even stronger in this new life. With that, the hare says he can no longer ignore these evil deeds now that he has been reborn as a member of this family. The relative lying on the ground cannot understand anything and asks what the boy means by those strange words. Then Dalton widens his eyes as he feels his life slipping away, trying to process what he just heard from the boy. At that moment, the man finally loses consciousness, and his eyes become completely dull, marking the end. Then the body hits the ground hard, while the protagonist tells the former hero Burko to wait for what is to come. With a determined look, the necromancer states that he will rebuild this ruined house alone, and with his own hands. But suddenly, the villain opens his eyes in a dark place and wonders where on earth he ended up after the fight. Realizing the danger, he notices he is surrounded by pitch-black darkness and feels a strange weight restricting his limbs. In that instant, we see heavy iron chains binding the man so he cannot escape. Dalton then realizes he is sitting in a bizarre punishment chair and lets out a sound of pure confusion and fear. Just then, a shadowy silhouette approaches and says the traitor has finally woken up to face the consequences. Revealing his form, the Master of Shadows explains that this is the realm of the fallen, created by him, the Great Archman. The aggressor is shocked to hear the name of the legendary dark entity and asks if that is truly the afterlife. With that, the necromancer begins to remind the man of how he used to torment innocent animals purely for fun in the past. He goes on to say that Dalton committed terrible atrocities, using the excuse that he was just hunting in the forest. At that moment, the boy says he clearly remembers the smile on his cousin's face while committing those endless cruel acts. Furious, the prisoner yells for him to shut up and demands to be released immediately, making empty threats. But shortly after, the man pauses and starts thinking harder about everything that happened in the previous battle. He clearly remembers the exact moment he was hit by Klain's blade and how that wound seemed critical. Then the villain realizes he does not have a single scratch, and the protagonist states that he has already fallen and will now face his karma. He says it does not matter if his cousin believes it or not, because what truly matters now is final justice. Right then, the young master states that the time has come for him to pay for all the sins committed during his mediocre life. The aggressor is completely terrified, understanding nothing as tears start to fall from his wide eyes. Then the former necromancer tells him to listen closely to the sound of payback, because the animals he mistreated are now hungry. With that, the creatures charge, and the villain screams in despair as he feels the bite of his own karma. And at that moment, he realizes this is the true abyss he built himself through his cruelty and selfishness. Crying out in agony, the cousin begs for mercy, but the protagonist shows absolutely no compassion for the traitor. At this, a tear rolls down his face as he realizes his final fate was sealed in that dark place. back in the real world, we see the fallen aggressor completely defeated on the ground of the forest after the battle is over. The white-haired boy observes the outcome of the fight with a cold expression while the wind blows around him. With a thoughtful look, the protagonist puts his weapon away and gets ready to leave before anyone shows up at the location. Right then, he sees his skeletal soldiers disappearing into the darkness as he fulfills his promise to the fallen. With that, the Necromancer says the request has been answered, and now he must reward the soul for helping in the battle. He then uses his power to break the curse binding that spirit, finally letting it rest in peace. At this, bright lights shine as the soul breaks free from its chains and vanishes into the forest night sky. Alone in the silence, the hare reflects on his new existence while looking at the traces of destruction. He stands in silence for a few seconds, trying to understand what changed in his heart after waiting for so long. The young master thinks that the end is merely the moment when bones break and scatter in the wind, leaving no trace. But he wonders what the real purpose of returning to life could be after 200 years of total darkness. At that instant, a familiar voice emerges from the shadows and says he is surprised to see the boy using forbidden arts there. The mysterious voice startles him, and the boy demands to know who the intruder is and if he saw everything. The hooded figure says he does not need to know and would not understand anyway. With that, the mysterious man starts using magic with a green aura radiating from his hand. The figure adds that even if he told him, the hare would not be able to understand what is going on. Just then, the green energy hits one of the fallen men on the ground, and his eyes start to glow. Up close, we see the man's eyes glowing intensely, indicating he was brought back. With a gesture, the hooded man begins raising all the bodies of the defeated mercenaries. The protagonist then recognizes the technique and realizes these are resurrection arts meant to control the fallen. With this discovery, he figures out that the mysterious figure standing before him is also a necromancer. The mysterious necromancer says Dalton failed, but that he is going to use the bodies for his plans. With an evil laugh, the man's voice echoes across the mountain during the dark and cold night. Meanwhile, back at the mansion, Maid Aaron invites Dunkel to listen to funny stories about the young master. However, the commander seems very worried and says he will listen to it all later. He stares at the magic signal scroll and wonders why his master used an emergency item. The guard figures it has been 3 hours, and he has a terrible feeling about the situation. Worried, he decides to go after the hare but is stopped by other guards along the way. The guards tell him it would be an issue if he left his post, since the competition is still happening. The commander glares at the men with a suspicious look, trying to figure out what is going on. Right then, he recognizes the crest of the Cornwall family and suspects they are Cousin Dalton's guards. He sees through the setup and says he will not stand down if they try to stop him again, leaving a clear warning. The two guards swallow hard, completely intimidated by the direct threat from the commander staring right at them. Dunkel then turns to little Aaron and tells her that the young lord is taking too long, so he is going after him. Then the knight asks the maid to head back safely to the mansion accompanied by Priest Garrison. But one of the guards points out that the cleric had already slipped away looking very serious, leaving everyone confused. At that moment, the commander remembers the warning about the sinister aura and realizes the priest must have gone after the hare. With that, he quickly mounts his horse extremely tense, knowing the situation has gotten completely out of hand. He bites the magic scroll tightly and deduces that this sudden disappearance is definitely no coincidence. The warrior rides as fast as he can, certain that something terrible is happening to the boy in the forest. Meanwhile, we see the protagonist standing alone, facing the new army of the fallen led by the mysterious sorcerer. The white-haired boy assesses the situation, knowing that all his dark energy was spent in the previous battle. He realizes he cannot use his summoning powers at that exact moment because of exhaustion. The hooded enemy laughs, saying the boy's fragile body will not hold up and orders his monsters to charge. With that command, the horde of terrifying creatures starts running furiously toward the young lord. But the former necromancer just clenches his fist tightly, finding it amusing how arrogant the villain is to try and finish him like that. With a mocking smile and his eyes glowing purple, he warns the arrogant sorcerer that he is completely screwed. Suddenly, the sacred mark of a glowing emblem appears on the back of the hare's hand, lighting up all the darkness. The corpses keep charging mindlessly, drooling and growling, ready to tear the boy to pieces. At that instant, the hooded enemy widens his eyes in pure shock, unable to understand what was about to happen. A gigantic pillar of golden light tears through the sky and hits the forest floor with devastating, heavenly force. And from that light emerges a colossal golden warrior who crushes the monsters with a powerful punch, protecting the young master. With his eyes shining gold, the protector asks the divine light to grant peace and purify that entire dark area. At that, a massive burst of heavenly energy descends from the sky, defeating all the monsters threatening the hare's life. The hooded enemy groans in pain as he takes a direct hit from the overwhelming brightness of that immensely strong holy magic. From the sheer impact of the attack, the dark villain ends up being violently thrown far away. The aggressor tries to balance himself, sweating cold, and wonders what kind of man is capable of using such devastating divine power. Watching everything, the white-haired boy thinks that the warrior with the greatest martial strength in the world has finally appeared. An imposing silhouette emerges from the dust and tells the young master to be completely at ease from that moment on. Then the priest reveals his face with a serious look and states with great confidence that he is now there to protect him. But the battle is not over yet, and the remaining corpses keep rushing blindly attack the duo in the forest. At that moment, the monsters leap with their swords toward the cleric and the protagonist, completely fearless of falling. One of the bizarre creatures lets out a very scary roar while trying to consume the scarred man with all its fury. However, the warrior lands a punch charged with holy light right in the monster's face, breaking it into tiny pieces. With that, the Guardian launches a powerful divine attack that crushes and defeats the rest of the enemies, ordering everyone to hear him. The young man recalls that there are only 3 human weapons chosen to execute the absolute will of the great Pope of the Order. And as the most powerful combat force, they are the only ones who can wield the sacred artifacts left behind by the saint. These legendary items are well known by everyone as holy armaments blessed with absurd magical power. The boy remembers that each of these warriors of light has enough power to effortlessly destroy an entire wall. The evil sorcerer is completely paralyzed with fear upon seeing all that light and asks again for the name of that monster. Smiling, the combatant reveals he is the church's supreme executioner and says the shadow villain's end has finally arrived. And with that epic entrance, the protector officially joins the fight, fully ready to handle the enemy threat. With his eyes shining brightly, the priest warns the sinners to seek forgiveness and start praying. He then charges forward swiftly, crushing the bone creatures, promising to give them a baptism of pure fire. At this, the monsters let out groans of agony while the cleric states he is going to wash away all their sins. With immense force, the holy warrior stumps on the shattered ground, scattering rocks and dirt everywhere. That simple movement creates a massive shockwave that kicks up dust and sweeps the battlefield instantly. The bright light hits the corpses head-on, taking out several at once while he claims that this is what mercy looks like. Holding his glowing book, the churchman finishes his sentence, warning that this was the final judgment. Watching the massacre, the villain sweats cold, thinking it is insane for a high-ranking member of the Order to be there. The sorcerer is absolutely shocked by the absurd level of power the hero uses to wipe out his army. Utterly desperate, the dark mage turns his back and starts running, muttering that he was badly tricked. As he flees through the forest, he curses the situation, finding it unfair to have to face such an overpowered force. During his wild sprint, his mask ends up falling to the ground, revealing the clear panic on his face. But suddenly, the cleric appears like a ghost right behind him, asking where he thought he was going. In that moment, the warrior grabs the enemy's head very forcefully, making the villain cry out in intense pain. The scared man calmly warns that the prayer is not over yet and tells the sinner to be very grateful for it. Crying in agony, the sorcerer feels the impact while the priest says the final verdict has been delivered to him. With those harsh words, the knight calls upon the holy light to wrap up the judgment once and for all. Then the young master calmly walks down from a small hill after watching that entire divine spectacle. Walking through the ruined scenery, the boy notices a creepy remnant left behind by the monsters on the ground. With a very serious expression, the white-haired protagonist stops and hears the guardian call his name. The cleric takes just one step forward and advances rapidly, while the young master watches everything very closely. At that, the immense wind pressure caused by his rush annihilates dozens of bodies instantly. The former necromancer becomes completely tense, sweating cold upon witnessing that sheer display of brute force. Right then, a giant hand covered in red marks appears out of nowhere, getting dangerously close to the hair. The holy warrior grabs the boy's shoulder, saying he rushed over as soon as he felt the dark aura. With a bizarre smile on his face, the priest mentions that the whole situation felt very strange to him. He keeps talking in a threatening tone, stating that the energy he felt did not seem to belong to the defeated mage. The executioner's gaze becomes extremely intimidating, indicating he suspects the young man's true intentions. With this, the protagonist swallows hard, realizing that this fanatic man was about to discover a secret. The boy concludes that if he makes just one wrong move, the crazy cleric will finish him off right there. But suddenly, a familiar voice echoes through the forest calling for the Lord and breaking that tense atmosphere. It was Commander Dunkel arriving on horseback, desperately asking if the young master was hurt. The white-haired boy turns his face, relieved to see his loyal knight quickly approaching the area. However, the hare feels the weight of exhaustion and realizes that his fragile body could not handle the power of necromancy. The commander goes into full panic upon seeing his master's face completely covered in the aftermath and injuries. Then the soldier jumps off the moving horse and runs desperately toward the hare, who ends up falling to his knees. Dunkel holds him tightly, asking what happened, while the boy tells him to stop shouting because his legs gave out. The knight tries to figure out the mess and asks where Lord Dalton, who is supposed to join him on the hunt, is. With a cold expression, the former necromancer simply confesses that he ended up taking down his own cousin in the forest. And to justify his extreme action, the young lord claims that the traitor tried to finish him first without any mercy. Hearing that, the commander is shocked and slams his hand down hard, asking what the young man was talking about. The scene shifts to a tribunal where an older man yells furiously, asking if his son tried to assassinate the hare. The count says his beloved son was a knight and accuses everyone of setting them up to tarnish his family's honor. At that moment, a blonde nobleman stands up calmly and suggests they should prioritize finding the real culprit. The man shows an official document noting that even after long interrogations, the protagonist did not change his statement. Furthermore, he reveals there are records confirming the Count sent about 20 mercenaries on the day of the tragic incident. Cornered, the leader of the Branch family sweats cold and thinks angrily that his foolish men left obvious trails behind. But the desperate nobleman tries to argue, saying the white-haired lord has never even touched a sword in his life. The other aristocrats start whispering, agreeing that it would be totally impossible for a boy with no mana to defeat a genius. With that, the Count realizes the failure of the attack is already undeniable and fears ruin if the full truth is discovered. So the calculating old man decides to twist the story's narrative and publicly questions who the hare really was. The man accuses the boy of being the target of sinister rumors since childhood and of spreading lies about being a reborn dark entity. He yells that they cannot believe a lunatic, but the nobleman cuts him off, demanding more respect for the main family. Out of his mind, the Count accuses the youth of hiring assassins until a powerful voice echoes through the hall telling him to be quiet. The aristocrat turns completely pale and looks back startled, trying to figure out who that incredibly arrogant voice belonged to. To everyone's surprise, the former necromancer walks down the hall's stairs, saying he was listening to all that nonsense. The protagonist coldly glares at the nobles and states that the cousin attacked him first, and it was all just simple self-defense. Then the boy explains that a mysterious enemy turned everyone into the undead, and the cleric had to step into the fight. The Count panics, pointing his finger and accusing the boy of lying, while the young man merely smiles mockingly. With a dark look, the hare asks if the rumor of him being a dark entity is real, leaving the old man speechless and terrified. With glowing eyes, he swears to rebuild the family with his own hands, without letting anyone get in his way. At that, the young master hears knocks on the door and turns around, while planning how to handle all the annoying relatives. Then the gates open, revealing a female figure with long blonde hair who apologizes for being late. This was the famous Knight Commander, arriving in the Grand Hall with a highly imposing presence. Confused, the hare wonders about the reason for the girl's visit, recalling having seen her before at the fencing event. One of the nobles finds the commander's involvement strange, but the boy's father notes that he permitted her entry. The Duke defends the young woman, calmly explaining that the deceased had already completed missions for the knights. Because of that, the leader argues that the woman has every right to participate in that important meeting. With a very sharp gaze, the warrior scans the entire room, paying close attention to every detail of the environment. In that moment, their eyes meet briefly as the blonde walks forward and asks to have just a word. Surprising everyone, the warrior requests a private chat with the protagonist, leaving the boy totally confused. The head of the family understands the situation and ends up granting permission, only asking that the conversation be quick. The Grand Duke then allows the young man to go with the lady, and he agrees, a bit hesitant about the new situation. Frustrated, the hare complains internally about the girl's attitude, finding it quite annoying to have to deal with her out of nowhere. But soon he changes his mind, realizing that this sudden request could be an excellent opportunity in his favor. The boy deduces 3 options: confirmation, suspicion, or a test, and with that, simply says goodbye to his father and goes with the young woman. As he walks, the young lord decides he will no longer run from any challenge that comes his way. Once they step out, the massive doors close, and the boy swears he will use all the knights as his great allies. At that, the powerful commander finally stops walking down the corridor and taps her foot, breaking the silence of the place. With a mysterious expression, the beautiful warrior stares closely at him, waiting for the right moment to reveal everything. The commander breaks the silence and asks him to speak with a very soft voice as she steps closer. In that moment, she fixes a penetrating look on the boy, maintaining an incredibly serious and mysterious expression. She is Leia Renfall-Wavern, the eldest daughter of one of the 3 great families and a true master with the spear. The warrior's flawless track record of skills shows she has already faced the worst imaginable creatures. With that, we see a pack of terrifying orcs roaring fiercely, ready to cause massive destruction. But the commander's eyes glow with intense blue energy as she quickly charges forward for the attack. Without hesitation, the blonde delivers a powerful strike and annihilates the beasts, using her sacred spear masterfully. All of this happened during a major monster subjugation operation in the western region of the continent. In that dangerous rescue mission, the incredible warrior defeated high-level beasts completely on her own. In the middle of the battlefield, her majestic silhouette stands out after saving countless civilians from certain disaster. And the fact that she did all that by herself made her a true legend among all the knights. Back in the present, the girl looks over her shoulder and asks if the young lord is not going to join her. He says he is already coming, and the blonde tells him not to fake intimacy, since they are not even from the same family. The protagonist remembers his father saying the girl would be his distant cousin because of a marriage. However, Leia is the daughter of the first wife, which means the two do not share a single drop of blood. The warrior then reveals she called him out of pure personal curiosity, leaving the former necromancer very confused. Suddenly, she steps in and corners him against the window, catching the boy off guard with a super fast move. At that instant, the commander raises her leg to block him and boldly asks if she can touch him. Cornered and sweating cold, the white-haired boy panics, wondering if that is actually real. Shocked by the unusual situation on the balcony, he questions what the girl means by touching him out of nowhere. At that, the commander breaks the silence and starts speaking with a very soft voice, getting closer and closer. Suddenly, she advances and corners him against the window, asking very boldly if she can touch him. Cornered and sweating cold, the white-haired boy panics, wondering if that is actually real. Totally shocked by the unusual situation on the balcony, he questions what the girl means by that out of nowhere. But the blonde just orders the youth to hold out his hand and quickly grabs him quite firmly by the wrist. She strokes his skin, noting that it is very soft and without a single scar, looking like the fragile hand of a baby. The hare is shocked by her action, thinking that experienced swordsmen might not even have visible calluses. At that moment, the woman presses specific points on his fingers, warning that tendons never lie about training. With this, the warrior brings her face closer to the boy's and concludes with absolute certainty that he did not use any sword. Staring closely at the youth, she questions how someone with no marks on his hands survived and defeated 20 armed men. With a highly suspicious look, the commander brilliantly deduces that the young lord used some other kind of power. Frightened by the terrible discovery, the protagonist pushes the woman away in an act of pure desperation. He then steps back, playing it off, and asks if she is also going to accuse him of being a dark entity, finding the blonde very dangerous. But the knight maintains her firm posture, showing her eyes are not looking for answers, but for a true reaction. Realizing that silence would be his ruin, the young master decides to be even bolder and asks, what if he really is? To the boy's surprise, the warrior simply starts laughing in his face, completely dismissing the confession. With a beautiful mocking smile, the woman states it is impossible for a shorty like him to be that highly feared monster. At that, the former necromancer is left completely bewildered and speechless at being called a shorty in such a humiliating way. The poor guy widens his eyes, unable to believe that his grand demonic presence was reduced to that. Trembling with anger, the lord asks if she misspoke, but the blonde denies it, offering to repeat the insult right then. Tired, the boy wonders why he would let her do that, since his injuries prevent any rational thought. He then questions if this is some sort of bribe, but the warrior just turns her back and says it is already late. With that, the commander walks to the balcony and looks at the scenery outside, seeming quite deep in thought. With a serious look, the blonde concludes that the feared Lord of Darkness would never accept going through that kind of humiliation. Back in the Grand Hall, the guards finally announce the return of the young lord accompanied by the commander. The two then walk calmly across the tribunal carpet, drawing all the attention of the nobles present in the room. Sitting in his place, the boy admits he was complacent because he was just the second son who was locked up for 7 years. The hare notices the count's furious glare and concludes that no one there would believe his story of self-defense. At that moment, the Grand Duke breaks the silence and asks to know what the two talked about outside. But instead of answering, the white-haired boy takes a step forward and draws a sword, surprising the warrior. With a lot of force, he slams the massive blade into the tribunal floor, causing an impact that echoes throughout the room. The boy's sudden and aggressive attitude leaves all the aristocrats present completely shocked and confused. Even the head of the family widens his eyes, bewildered by the audacity of his own son in the middle of that trial. The count steps back, frightened by the tip of the weapon pointed at him, while the lord calls his name threateningly. The former necromancer declares he will prove the truth himself and tells the old man to stop stalling so they can settle it like men. With a highly confident look, the protagonist challenges the leader of the Branch family to a feared trial by combat. Hearing this, the desperate nobleman stutters, asking if the boy lost his mind proposing a duel like that. This is an ancient method of the North used when there is no consensus, where both sides fight with no weapon restrictions. Basically, the winner decides the verdict, and the count thinks the idea is absurd, but the youth claims he has plenty of reasons. The hare accuses the old man of trying to frame him even with evidence of his son's betrayal, and of insulting his mother on top of that. Gripping his sword tightly, the hare tells the count to make a decision already, because everyone's patience there was at its limit. The leader of the Branch family swallows hard, while the other nobles start murmuring, excited about that ancient duel. Then the Grand Duke decides to intervene, stating he will guarantee the combat and void all evidence collected up to that moment. The aristocrat is confused at first, but soon realizes that without the evidence against him, the situation ends up working in his favor. With a relieved smile, the count sees a great opportunity and reminds everyone that the young master has no mana. The malicious old man provokes him, saying he is going to send one of his best knights and threatens to end the brat's life in the duel. But the former necromancer just gives a mocking smile, telling the old man to shut up because the count will be the one leaving there defeated. Furious at the insult, the noble accepts the challenge on the spot, determining that the great mortal combat will take place in just 4 days. The white-haired protagonist keeps his calm gaze while thinking about using this event to send a message to everyone. We see the grand castle from the outside as he promised to destroy the traitors and restore all the prestige of his beloved family. But soon after, the scene cuts to the inside of the mansion, where we hear someone screaming, totally outraged by all that madness. His blonde half-brother stares at him in absolute shock, asking if the hare lost his head by accepting a mortal combat. The talented Delane warns that he could meet his end, while the boy just sighs bored, saying he has heard that several times already. The white-haired youth explains that his father already gave permission, leaving the blonde boy even more indignant at the disregard. The skilled swordsman then suggests fighting in his master's place as a representative, but the protagonist refuses immediately. The heir reminds his half-brother that the main family only rules the north because they have the duke and his brilliant blonde successor. The boy says it makes no sense for the true genius to risk his own life in a fight like that, telling him to come to his senses. The former Dark Lord explains that if he fought, it would give the traitors a great legal chance to eliminate the successor to the dukedom. With a determined look, he admits he understands his brother's frustration but points out that he needs to do this to change his reputation. Sitting with his arms crossed, the boy states he has no reason to back down from the fight, as he is going to handle all of that on his own. The talented swordsman remembers when his younger brother was born, running fast to get a close look at him. Then the scene focuses on the small, fragile hand of the baby lying in the crib, bathed in a very comforting light. With a look full of innocence, the young genius admits he thought he was seeing a true angel for the first time. Delane says he does not care that they are half-brothers, because he waited 7 long years for his relative's return. At that moment, the blonde youth grabs the collar of the hare's shirt quite forcefully, with visible indignation on his face. But the lord just watches in silence, noticing a tear rolling down the warrior's face as he asks him to listen. The former necromancer is completely surprised, wondering internally what the real reason for that unexpected crying is. Then one of the family's guards opens the large door of the tribunal and interrupts the conversation, calling for the white-haired boy. The soldier apologizes for the intrusion, informing him that Count Cornwell had already chosen his own official representative. The blonde brother quickly approaches, asking who the opponent is, and the guard reveals the name of a certain Randall. With a very tense expression, the informant explains that the man is an excommunicated knight, quite famous for his past battles. Then the scene cuts to the wooden doors of an old, mysterious tavern slowly opening in the middle of nowhere. The soldier reveals the reason for the knight's expulsion, while we see the stuffed head of a large lion hanging on the wall. According to the guard, the mercenary had a totally uncontrollable urge to eliminate people, while a red beverage fills a cup. Next, we see a chaotic and disturbing scene with fallen men, while a giant sits in the middle of that destruction. This colossal warrior tips the small wooden barrel into his mouth, drinking all the liquid in a very animalistic way. With a completely dirty face, the giant smiles, saying it has been a long time since he heard the cries of despair from a young boy. But back at the tribunal, the young lord just maintains a calm and confident look, showing he has absolutely no fear of that challenge. At the beginning of the day of the duel, a man hands a sword to our protagonist. He explains that he forged the weapon exactly as the young man asked and warns him to be careful. Then the blacksmith warns that the sword will break the moment it clashes with a blade infused with mana. The white-haired young man simply replies that this is good and tells them to hurry to the arena. Already at the combat site, Klain gets ready with his new sword in hand and a confident look. The crowd in the stands shouts his name and is surprised to see that he actually showed up to fight. Sitting in his place of honor, the count sneers, mocking the idea that the hare actually came in person. He then asks the duke if everything is alright with the situation and brags about his imperial champion. The nobleman even suggests that it is not too late to send the talented Delane to fight instead of his brother. But the protagonist simply ignores the conversation and asks where his opponent is. Looking to the side, the young man wonders if his opponent has not yet come out for the match. Suddenly, a huge shadow appears and a gigantic man jumps into the arena. With incredible strength, the figure climbs the arena wall and prepares for the clash. This brute is Randall, the champion of Cornwell, and he asks if the boy is Lord Klain. The heir of the main family comments that his opponent seems to be much younger than he thought. Randall smiles and says his arms are thin, wondering what sound he will make when he is defeated. But before the giant could grab him, the young man steps back with surprising speed. The relatives in the audience are shocked and wonder what that was, and if he just ran backward. The count then gets annoyed and asks the duke if he can really handle this duel acting like that. Seeing the boy's action, the giant smiles and says the young man seems to be completely terrified. The young man looks away and says it is nothing like that, while thinking he just got startled for nothing. He remembers when the priest grabbed him and admits he cowered for a second without realizing it. In the stands, the blonde commander watches the arena, while the young man scolds the priest in his thoughts. The girl continues with a thoughtful look, seeming to analyze every movement of the duel. A subordinate suggests they go back, but the commander says she does not care about that woman. She then thinks to herself that if the boy wins the duel, she will give him a special treat. Back in the arena, the hare faces his opponent and says he needs to confirm something. With a red face, he covers his mouth and makes up an excuse, saying he had a stiff neck. He warns him not to touch his shoulder, but the giant grabs him with his huge hand before he finishes. With a furious look, the protagonist calls him a weirdo and asks if his ears are made of muscle. He continues the insult, saying that is why the Empire abandoned him, and the brute gets angry. With a scary smile, the giant says that is excellent because the worse his mouth is, the more he will have to yell later, and then he throws a powerful punch at the young man. At the last second, the young man presses a small button on his jacket, making a clicking sound. The giant's punch hits the ground with devastating force, breaking the entire arena. A huge cloud of dust rises from the impact, completely covering the battlefield. In the middle of the smoke, Randall seems confused and wonders where his opponent went. He then looks at his hand and realizes he is only holding the remains of the boy's clothes. In the stands, the relatives gasp in shock at the power of the strike, and one of them points at something. The audience then realizes that Lord Clean has disappeared from the arena, leaving the giant alone. The protagonist lands softly on the other side of the arena after escaping the attack. He faces his opponent, now without his jacket and with his sword in hand, ready for the fight. The young man takes a deep breath and thinks his enemy has a terrible temper and that the clash will be difficult. He knows that if he gets hit by that massive body, he will go flying, and he hates to admit it. In the audience, his half-brother Delane is worried, because he believes he cannot beat a monster like that. With an apprehensive look, the blonde young man thinks Clean is just walking to his own downfall. Remembering the conversation, Delane clenches his fist and agrees that the family's destiny is on the line. Back to the fight, the giant attacks again with a powerful strike that cracks the arena floor. But the protagonist swiftly dodges the giant's punch, which narrowly misses him. With his eyes glowing purple, the hare prepares a counterattack with his sword. The glowing blade then moves toward the giant's face with incredible speed. The brute takes a direct hit from the attack and is sent spinning through the air by the force of the strike. However, the tip of the sword breaks upon hitting his opponent's tough skin. After the attack, the young man lands and slides backward, creating a trail of destruction on the ground. Recovering quickly, the giant throws another devastating punch at his opponent. The young man blocks the punch with his broken sword, which now glows brightly in a golden tone. With a furious look, Randall taunts him, asking why he does not use his necromancy. The giant then shouts the name Archman while the young man struggles to hold back the attack. Suddenly, the brute's eyes widen in shock as he notices something unexpected. With a slight smile, the protagonist closes his eyes, and the scene slowly darkens. In a memory flash, he gets annoyed and thinks about using necromancy to take everyone down at once. The giant then stands completely shocked by what he just witnessed in the middle of the arena. With a powerful leap, Randall backs away from the boy, fearing the power he just felt. In the audience, everyone wonders if the brute dodged and finds it impossible that he is holding back. Breaking into a cold sweat, the champion wonders what that was, since there was nothing there. Suddenly, he feels a sinister aura and has a vision of Archman's fearsome dark figure. The count in the stands does not understand and wonders why his champion is acting that way. By his side, the Duke watches the clash with a serious look, paying attention to every detail of the duel. The protagonist then tells his opponent not to worry, because he will not use necromancy. With a smile, he declares that he is a Rhineland, that this is a place to prove oneself with the sword. The Duke and his son Delane are completely surprised by the young hare's words. Moved by his attitude, Delane calls his half-brother's name with a look of admiration. The crowd goes wild and starts chanting Lord Clean's name in support of the young man. The Count is furious with the turn of events and cannot believe what he is seeing happen. Randall convinces himself that it was all a bluff and that the boy is not a real threat. He thinks it was just a coincidence because he is superior in strength and endurance. Furthermore, the brute remembers that the boy has no mana and unleashes a red aura. He explains that the strength of imperial swordsmanship is not based on mana, but on pushing the senses to the limit. Focusing on his breathing muscles and blood flow, he increases his power in a frightening way. With this, he charges forward with explosive power and shouts for the Rhineland hare to face his defeat. The giant attacks with a red strike, and the protagonist jumps into the air to dodge the attack. With his eyes glowing purple, the hare says he can see his opponent's technique and mana. Randall continues his relentless attack and unleashes a series of furious strikes against the boy, but the white-haired young man manages to dodge all of them, seeing the exact arc of every movement. Furious at the boy's agility, the brute calls him a fly and prepares a new attack. He then shouts for his opponent to face his downfall and launches a full force strike. The impact hits the arena floor and causes great destruction on the battlefield. With that, a massive cloud of dust rises and covers the entire view of the clash. In the middle of the smoke, the giant looks for his opponent, who has completely disappeared from sight. He then wonders if the boy vanished and if he managed to read the entire path of his sword. Suddenly, Klain appears in the air right behind Randall and prepares for a counterattack. With a smile, he warns him that with a body that size, his back is left exposed. Next, the hare hits the giant with a powerful strike, and a purple aura surrounds him. In the audience, the relatives are shocked and wonder what technique he just used. Delane cannot believe what he is seeing and wonders if that was really the legendary meteor sword. By his side, the Duke is also completely shocked by his son's skill. On the arena floor, the brute cries out, feeling the impact of the devastating attack. The Duke thinks that makes no sense as the boy has no mana to use that technique. The blonde commander's subordinate asks her in shock if she managed to see what happened. With a red face, the girl is left speechless and completely surprised by the young man. In a memory, the Duke reveals that in a normal situation, he would have intervened in the conflict himself. Commander Domo questions him, but the father says he knows he cannot act on personal feelings. The guard then argues that Klain has no chance against an Imperial Knight and asks why he allowed the duel. With a sad look, the Duke explains that his son stood up to defend the honor of his late mother. He regrets not being able to save him from the monastery and wonders what right he had to stop him. With that, the father concludes that in the end, he cannot protect his son or his family and clasp his hands. But the commander comforts him, telling him not to worry because young Master Clean is different. With a confident look, Dylan states that the boy does not enter battles he knows he will lose. Back in the arena, we see the confirmation of his words as the hare lands a direct hit on the giant. In the audience, the Duke's eyes widen, completely shocked to see his son's power. Then an explanation about the Rhineland family's swordsmanship appears, showing a sword of ice. Imperial swordsmanship is like the predation of a lion hunting its prey with full force and no mercy. It is based on overwhelming the opponent by releasing all mana at once for a crushing attack. In contrast, Northern swordsmanship is more restrained, like rabbits observing before taking action. The Northern family needed endurance to survive the freezing fields, and because of that, they saved their energy. Their technique is temperance, like an eagle waiting for the perfect moment to strike. They attack the opponent's openings using the least amount of mana possible for maximum efficiency. That is the essence of Rhineland swordsmanship: maximum efficiency with minimal power consumption. With a smile, the protagonist explains that this is how someone without mana can use his family's techniques. He then taunts the giant, saying he might lack power, but is more than enough to defeat him. Furious at the taunt, the giant bares his teeth and calls him a little mouse. He then unleashes a blast of red energy that consumes everything around him. With his muscles tensed, the brute shouts, releasing even more power. In the audience, the relatives are completely shocked by the display of strength. But the Count smiles because he recognizes that as Randall's secret technique. It is a mana burst that seals the opponent's movements and a lion spirit appears. Randall yells at him not to make him laugh and gets ready for the final strike. The champion then jumps into the air with his flaming sword, shouting that he will be the winner. Seeing the danger, Delane yells desperately for his half-brother to be careful. The brute then descends with his sword in a devastating strike toward the young man. The swords clash in a flash of sparks, and the hare blocks the attack with his blade. He remembers the blacksmith warning him that the sword would break when clashing with mana. And just as planned, the protagonist's blade shatters into several pieces. With a victorious smile, the giant celebrates, saying it serves clean right. He continues the strike, but the boy's broken sword now glows in a dark purple tone. With a sinister smile and glowing eyes, the hare says it is now complete. He then reveals that this was the weapon to hunt the lion, and a feather falls slowly. The imposing lion watches the falling feather, seeming confused by the unexpected situation. Suddenly, the shadow of a giant eagle covers the lion, which is now fallen and defenseless. Back in the arena, the protagonist holds the hilt of his broken sword, which emanates a dark aura. The dark energy shapes itself like a blade, and the hare strikes the giant with a precise blow. With the impact, Randall's hand is hit, and he drops his sword, which falls to the arena floor. Seeing the result, the Duke stands up and, with a firm voice, declares that it is enough. The relatives are shocked by the outcome, and one of them announces that the duel is finally over. Commander Dunn reflects that Rhineland swordsmanship can be done with little mana but requires experience. With that, he thinks the boy executed everything perfectly, from his footwork to his sword play, and that he broke the sword on purpose so he could attack from close range, which leads to one conclusion. That was the young master's perfect victory, and Randall cries out, holding his arm. The giant writhes on the ground, and the medics rush to the arena to tend to his injury. The healers use magic to treat the brute while the protagonist watches the scene. With a dark curiosity, the young man asks if the giant's arm can be reattached. One of the medics explains that it cannot, and that he will need healing magic and an artificial arm. The Duke then approaches, and the hare thinks that healing magic has not advanced at all in 200 years. His father then asks him if he feels nothing seeing a member injured like that. The young man remembers that he is no longer Archmond and needs to act differently now. He then scratches his head and pretends to be scared of the scene to hide his coldness. Count Kamal freaks out and cannot believe Randall lost after all the money he spent. The Duke then confronts him and demands that he admit his fault, but the nobleman refuses to accept it. Beside himself, the Count yells that he lost his son and his knight and cannot accept defeat. But before he can continue, his head is struck, and he is abruptly silenced. With a cold look and glowing eyes, the protagonist uses his voice to control Duncan Conwell. The nobleman then starts to feel unwell, as if an invisible force is suffocating him. He is completely shocked and does not understand what is happening to his body. Suddenly, the Count falls to his knees, and the young man says that as the winner, he has an order to give. He then commands the nobleman to confess his wrongdoings and kneel before the Master of the North. A purple aura surrounds him, and the hare tells him to beg for mercy and repent. The dark energy then intensifies, forcing the Count to confront his actions in a terrifying way. He then has a vision of Archmond's dark figure and panics at what he sees. Sweating cold, the nobleman is completely paralyzed by fear and the pressure of that aura. Unable to bear the terror, he lets out a scream of pure despair in front of everyone. Completely defeated, the Count bows before the boy and admits he was wrong. That was the voice of the fallen, a necromancer technique used to summon the souls of those who are gone. It is an ability that disturbs the soul and induces extreme terror in the living, and the nobleman apologizes. Crying, he confesses to having insulted the young master's mother and begs for forgiveness. In the audience, the other nobles are shocked and cannot believe a pillar of the family crumbled like that. With the hilt of his sword in hand, the protagonist says that everything starts from that moment. He then raises his weapon and asks everyone present to listen carefully. With a determined look, he declares himself the challenger and the rightful winner of that combat. The young man proudly says he is the son of Grand Duchess Claire Ledalisis, and also the second son of the strongest knight in the north, the great Heinkel Rhienland. He then finishes his speech by proudly declaring his name, Clean Rhienland. The scene then shifts to a dark place where a mysterious figure enters a grand hall. Inside, Priest Garrison prays, asking the god of light to watch over them even on dangerous paths. An angel statue is illuminated while the cleric's prayer echoes through the hall of the Sacred Order. Suddenly, Cardinal Murok appears and calls his name, and the man responds promptly. Murok notices his gloomy voice and asks what happened, and the priest reports the Necromancer's attack. But the cardinal reassures him, saying not to worry because it was all part of their plan. He reveals that the Necromancer was sent in cooperation with the Empire to instill fear in the people. With that, Murok explains that the terrified people would seek the Sacred Order for protection. The religious leader says they could revive the order with a few sacrifices, showing his cruelty. But at that moment, Garrison grabs the cardinal's neck with fury, abruptly interrupting him. With a furious look, he accuses him of lowering himself to political games and deals with heretics. The cardinal then panics and asks what he is doing while struggling to breathe. With his eyes wide in terror, he tries to ask for help, but his voice will not come out. A sound echoes, and the angel statue appears with its face covered by the result of the act. Garrison then takes down the corrupt cardinal, leaving his defeated body on the hall floor. He tosses the body aside and asks the thin air if the person feels better now. Suddenly, a new figure appears and says he has not changed at all, having eliminated more clerics than the Necromancers. This man is Palamon L., the Archbishop of the Sacred Order, and he seems to know everything. With a hateful look, Garrison glares at him and asks if all of that was his doing. The Archbishop denies it and says he only authorized the plan and brought important information. With a quick movement, he tosses what is left of the Necromancer toward Garrison. The priest manages to catch the remains at the last second before they hit him directly. Palamon then reveals that when necromancy is used, it inevitably leaves a trail. He shows a cross-shaped vial and explains that it contains the traces of the Necromancer's magic. With that, the Archbishop reveals there are two types of necromancy, one that raises the fallen and one that manipulates souls. The priest is shocked to hear about the original form of necromancy, and Palamon confirms it. He then concludes that this means there were two necromancers at the scene of the attack on the boy. In a flash to the arena, Delane hugs his half-brother, and Palamon tells him to listen closely. The Archbishop reveals his surveillance target is the second son of the Rhineland family. He then takes a dramatic pause and prepares to reveal the young man's true identity. Back in the arena, the protagonist is surrounded by his allies and his half-brother Delane. With a shocking revelation, Palamon declares that Claim Rhineland is actually a necromancer. The scene then shifts to a rainy night in a dark and mysterious forest. A man uses a pickaxe to break crystals in a deep, dark cave. He works hard mining the crystals under the light of a single lantern at the site. Suddenly, he stops and wipes the sweat from his forehead, looking tired from the heavy labor. At that moment, he turns around and is completely terrified by what he sees behind him. A scream of terror echoes through the forest as the camera pulls back, revealing the immensity of the place. Back at the mansion, the maid Erin eats a piece of bread while thinking the situation is a disaster. The girl shows a doll with her master's face that she made herself while thinking about him. The maid then bursts into laughter, and the protagonist finds her very similar to himself. 1 week has passed since the combat, and the hare remembers his victory against the champion. He also recalls how he extracted the Count's confession and announced his existence to everyone. The young man thought he would finally be recognized but realized a major problem. His 15-year-old body did not have the stamina to keep up with his ambitions, and he needed to train. The maid calls him stingy for playing alone, and the boy says he is reading. But the girl insists it is just a novel, so he is basically just playing and having fun. He admits the cover looks like a standard novel, but the inside is quite different. The book is full of secret notes on anatomy and necromancy spell formations. With his current body, he can only summon 11 skeletons and needs to research more to increase his power. But his biggest problem is the priest, who is always ready to wipe out any trace of a necromancer. Suddenly, his father calls him and says he has received reports of strange sightings at the mine. The Duke shows a drawing of creatures that are commonly called the undead. Seeing the opportunity, the young man offers to go to the mine and says real combat is the best research. His father worries about the reports of victims, but the boy reassures him. He says it will not be a problem since his father already acknowledges him and that this is a great opportunity. At that moment, Commander Dunlop appears and says the Duke ordered him to accompany him on the mission. At night during the journey, the young man thinks he should have known the guard would come along. The commander then offers him a meat skewer, and the young man appreciates the gesture. With a smile, the commander tells the young master he should do some work too. While eating, the hare remains silent, appearing thoughtful about the situation. He then points to a piece of charcoal and says that standing still is already a huge help. The boy thinks he learned an unexpected fact about the commander, which is that he is useless at cooking. Embarrassed, the guard apologizes, but Clean just tells him to forget it and eat a little. With a confident look, he reveals he spent a decade running away, so this is no big deal. The commander watches him in silence, seeming to have something important to tell the boy. He then comments that by observing the young master, he realizes he is different from the others. The guard continues, saying that because of this, he sometimes thinks he is the reincarnation of Archmund. With a worried look, the protagonist warns him never to say that in front of the priest. He then remembers that Archmund was a demon who turned millions into the undead. The campfire crackles while a tense silence hangs between the two men. Suddenly, the flames flicker with a gust of wind that passes by them in the camp. The commander finds the sudden wind strange, but the protagonist says it was nothing. With a serious expression, the hare seems to sense something his companion missed. With his eyes full of fury, he warns him never to talk about that subject again. The guard is completely confused by the sudden reaction and calls him by his name. Suddenly, a terrifying scream echoes through the night, and the two jump up in fear. Another cry of dread echoes from a nearby village, indicating that something terrible is happening. A horde of undead creatures attacks the villagers, and someone yells for everyone to run away. With glowing, hungry eyes, the creatures rush toward the village residents. A yellow light then illuminates the night, and one of the undead stares at the source of the glow. Commander Dull enters the fight and with his flaming sword defeats several creatures. But he ends up getting careless and cries out, calling the young master's name. The hare then appears and, with his purple blade, defeats the monster that was attacking his guard. With a serious look, the young man asks the commander what he thinks he is doing. The young man then orders him to go save the people, and the guard readily agrees. With the situation under control, one of the undead falls defeated on the village ground. One of the villagers thanks them for the help and discovers they are from the Rhineland family. The guard then wonders since when those creatures started appearing there. The protagonist recognizes the reanimation magic as the same one that attacked him in the forest. A villager reveals that it all started 2 months ago after the count's family restricted the mine. He then says all the undead are actually village residents, and the boy is shocked. Suddenly, the man grabs the hare and asks angrily if he really is a Rhineland. Desperate, the villager shakes him and demands an answer, but the guard tries to intervene. The man shouts that they begged for help for 2 months and got no response. He then points to one of the undead creatures the young master just defeated. In a moment of grief, he reveals that creature was his father, who worked in the mine. Crying, the villager wonders why they have to suffer so much like this. The protagonist simply observes the scene with a cold and distant look, showing no emotion. He remembers his past life as Archmund and how people feared him. With a distant look, he snaps the villager back to reality and tells him to shut his mouth. Next, the boy says it is too noisy and asks why everything would be his fault. The villager is shocked by the young man's coldness, and tears begin to fall from his eyes. The protagonist continues, saying he was not the one who turned his father into an undead. With a blue aura in his hands, he tells the man to take his anger out on the right target. With that, the hare commands the innocent spirits who have passed to heed his call. Suddenly, the forms of the undead begin to move again, and the boy illuminates them. With his necromancy, he promises that as Clan Rhineland, he will uphold their will. The forms of the fallen ones disintegrate, and their souls begin to break free. The souls of the villagers rise from the remains and float in the air with a blue glow. The souls then thank the young man for freeing them from their suffering and torment. The hare communicates with the spirits and understands the gratitude and peace they feel. With a serene look, he accepts their gratitude and finally lets them rest in peace. Commander Dumble is shocked and recognizes the technique as soul resonance. He remembers that this was a technique used 200 years ago to free those who have passed. The villager watches his father's soul break free and calls out to him with tears in his eyes. The father's soul then dissolves into particles of light and rises to the heavens with the others. The souls illuminate the village night, and the residents watch the scene, moved by emotion. Under the light of the full moon, the village finally finds peace after so much suffering. After resolving the situation in the village, the two heroes head toward the mine. They then make their way up the mountain during the dark and silent night. One of the villagers points the way and explains that the mine is right up the mountain. As they walk, the commander asks the boy about what he discussed with the spirits. The white-haired young man looks thoughtful and replies that it was nothing major. He then reveals that the spirits simply thanked him for helping them move on, and that they also pleaded with him to seek revenge for everything that happened to them. The guard gets serious and repeats the word revenge as he thinks about the situation. He then remembers his suspicion about the boy being the reincarnation of Archmund. With that, he draws his sword, and the young man's reflection appears on the gleaming blade. The commander then questions him, asking directly who he really is.